Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. My name is Bill Trocchi, the senior editor at sportingnews.com, alongside our lead college football writer, Bill Bender at sportingnews.com. And again, we have another special guest, and it is another lead college football writer, national college football writer, Chris Hummer from 24/7 Sports. Chris is based out of Austin, Texas, where they are hosting the biggest spring quarterback battle in the history of college football this spring. Chris, welcome in.
I'm just honored to be here to talk about yet another Manning. Happy to be here. I appreciate it, guys.
So, Chris, yeah, we know that Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers are going at it. They had their first spring practice yesterday. You're in Austin, like I said. What's the buzz? What's the expectations around what'll happen over the next few weeks, and maybe some impressions that you took from Sark's press conference after the practice? He didn't necessarily, dodge or downplay the competition.
Yeah, I guess I would take this with two approaches. The first thing is what Steve Sarkisian said, which is that every position is up for grabs. He said what a coach is supposed to, and every position, including quarterback, is a competition. So in that sense, Quinn Ewers is competing with Arch Manning for the starting job, Malik Murphy as well, and several other Texas quarterbacks on the roster. The thing that I would say that's probably going to ruin the podcast title is this is not a competition, in my opinion, not even close to it. This is Quinn Ewers' job. The only way this competition, and quotation marks, really becomes a competition is if Quinn struggles to elevate from where he was last year. And I think the expectation is, with Quinn being healthier, with a third full year in a college, with a new haircut, that he'll be a much better quarterback in 2023. And I think the idea is, even for Arch Manning, just talking to people around Texas, and even like I was at the Manning Academy this summer, just talking to people who knew Arch very well, that he wasn't expecting to go into Texas and start right away. Like, this is a situation where they knew Quinn Ewers was there, and they were willing to be patient. So I think this is Quinn Ewers' job to lose, certainly.
That said, Chris, so what is the fascination factor with Arch Manning in Austin right now? And going in, I mean, one of the points I made is, like, a guy like me, another national writer, is going to watch the spring game probably to watch Arch more than Quinn. Is that, I mean, what is the buzz around him in Austin? Or is it kind of what you're saying, that people are just thinking, well, this is Quinn Ewers' job?
I mean, like, just from a buzz perspective, I don't know if y'all would agree, Arch is probably the most well-known name in college football the moment he stepped on campus, right? Like, I bet more people nationally know who Arch Manning is than Caleb Williams. Maybe they're tied, but like, given his last name, he is the most prominent figure in college football. That's just who he is. Like, his parents, Cooper Manning, did an admirable job protecting him during the recruiting process, and his uncles are obviously quite famous. But he's at Texas now, and he is the name. So there's a ton of interest. Like, I'm going to be at Texas this spring game, I'm sure, just to watch Arch Manning. But so from that perspective, there's a ton of interest in him. But I think people forget, like, Quinn Ewers was a higher ranked recruit than Arch Manning. Like, if you just talk about natural talent, I think Quinn has more than Arch in his right arm. There's a lot of qualities that you really like about Arch too. And he was the number one overall prospect on 24/7 Sports rankings for a reason. But like, this is a situation where it's not like Arch is coming in and pushing a non-established starter. He's pushing one of the players that we considered a generational quarterback prospect of the last 10 years. So I think Texas is banking on Quinn Ewers improving this year and showcasing a lot of the skills that made him talked about in the same way we talked about Trevor Lawrence just a couple of years ago. But I mean, I'm just like everybody else. I'm excited to see what Arch Manning does too, because we haven't seen Arch Manning play against good competition his entire career. He played at a small school in Louisiana, so it'll be very compelling to see how he does against Texas's defense.
Yeah, and Quinn showed off some of those skills that you talked about last year, and some really big games, some big performances, but he also showed some inconsistency. And I think that, inevitably had Texas fans, their minds wander a little bit to Arch Manning. And he remains a huge mystery, stayed away from a lot of those all-star camps and everything like that. So like you said, he hasn't shown a lot of competition. I mean, he hasn't played against a lot of highly ranked competition. But there's still to me, it's like Texas can't really go wrong here. I mean, it sounds like they have a game plan that they're ready to follow, but plan B is still pretty good.
I mean, when you get the number one overall quarterback basically in 2 of the last 3 years, you're in pretty good shape. So yeah, I mean, if Arch Manning is forced to play, and we saw Quinn Ewers get hurt last year, like Texas could do a lot worse, I'm sure. But I think plan A is certainly that Quinn Ewers plays well. I think the worst thing that could happen for Texas is for this to just become like a national QB conversation weekly. I remember some pretty notable quarterback competitions at Texas where the talent wasn't quite to this level. Shoot, I remember Vince Young and Colt McCoy being quarterback battles back in the day before they were who they were. But this has the potential to be an all-consuming thing from a media perspective and from a narrative perspective. So I think it would be best for all parties involved if Quinn was good and Arch was ready to play next year with a year of seasoning. But this is college football and you never know, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have the number one overall quarterback in your class as your backup plan.
Well, by all parties, you don't mean writers. I mean, we need something to write about, Chris. Come on. No, and along those lines too, when we went into last year, I remember a lot of people writing that, the Alabama game was going to be the bellwether game for Quinn Ewers, the ultimate test. Now, obviously, I told people he played very well until he got hurt. I mean, how much is that Alabama game, not just a measuring stick for the quarterbacks, but what do you think Texas will be going into that game? It looked like from a talent standpoint, they weren't overwhelmed in that game. They just got beat in the end.
Yeah, I mean, last year, I thought Quinn played the best game of the season outside of maybe the second half against Washington. He played great. And I think part of Quinn's struggles last year, coming back from injury, was just coming back from injury. I think he was a little hesitant. I think his footwork suffered. But we saw him play much improved football in the bowl game against Washington, against a pretty good team. So I think Texas is hoping some of that translates. As for the Alabama game and expectations, like Texas won't be favored. But like this is a game Texas could win, like on paper. If you look at Texas and you look at what Alabama brings back and all the questions Alabama has going into next year, like I don't think Alabama should be a huge favorite. This game should certainly be competitive like it was this year. If it's close or if Texas wins, I think it's certainly a bellwether for what is possible for Texas in 2023. I think the expectations for Texas going into next year is a Big 12 championship. They're the best team in the Big 12. The Big 12 is diluted heading into next season with the 4 teams coming in that are all going to have an adjustment period for the Big 12. This is your best opportunity before you get to the SEC to win a conference championship, because once you get to the SEC, it's a lot harder. Like everything sets up for Texas this year to make a run. And I think the Alabama game will be really telling as to whether they can do that.
Sark talked a little bit about the running game yesterday. He said he's had 1,000-yard rusher every year he's called plays, and he's called plays a long time. But he said he'll need the passing game to take some pressure off the run game. Who's in line to replace Bijan Robinson as the number one back for Texas?
Yeah, there's a couple of options for that. I think the name that most people are going to focus on is Cedric Baxter, who is a 5-star recruit in the 2023 class. If you think about the number one overall backs the last couple of years, they've all come in and had immediate success. Nick Singleton, Travion Henderson, Bijan Robinson all became immediate superstars. And I think Cedric Baxter has that type of ceiling. Texas's offensive line is going to be really good this year. I think it's expected to take a huge step forward. That group has been considerably upgraded via the recruiting rankings the last couple of years, and I think there's a lot of expectations on it. I don't know if Cedric Baxter will run for 1,000 yards as a freshman, but he'll certainly get some help from Jonathan Brooks. He's actually Texas's all-time, like the state of Texas' all-time rushing leader, I believe. He had a really decorated high school career. Not a supreme athlete, but a very good one, and clearly has great vision. Keelan Robinson's also back, kind of Texas's like scat back. So they have 3 potential options at running back that could take the reins there. But as you said, Bill, it's going to be on the passing game. Texas is going to have one of the 3 or 4 best receiver rooms in college football. And that's the unit you really hope can carry Texas if you're a Texas fan or a Texas coach.
So defensively, I mean, that's always a question when you come into Texas. Last year, only allowed 21.7 points per game. Didn't give up 30, only 2 games. I mean, why are they starting to improve on that side of the ball? It was down 10 points from the year before. And dare I say, will that be a strength for Texas coming into this year?
Yeah, it should be. Honestly, I could never really quite understand why Texas had bad defenses. Generally, it came down to the inability to tackle consistently and really having bust at the wrong moment. But a lot of that was alleviated last year. I think a lot of credit people try to put on Gary Patterson, and he certainly had a lot to do with it. He won't be back next year for Texas, but Pete Keselowski, the defensive coordinator, did an excellent job for Texas last year. And there's a ton of talent coming back on this defense. Jalen Ford might have been the best defensive player in the Big 12 last year. I know not a lot of people are familiar with his name, but he's an All-American candidate this year. And Texas, frankly, got better up front, particularly inside. They were just massive. They were really hard to run against. For the first time in what seems like forever, Texas's talent translated up front. Texas still needs to get better. They need to figure out a way to generate a pass rush. The secondary is still a bit of a question, but they have added 2 notable transfers. Jalen Catalon from Arkansas, Gavin Holmes from Wake Forest, both of whom are going to be either starters or plug-and-play depth pieces. So Texas, when you think of the recruiting rankings and you think of the talent and you think of the overall depth on the roster, is better than it's been in a long time on defense. And I think the expectation is that unit will maintain or even get a little bit better going into next year.
Chris, you mentioned, Alabama looking for a quarterback. We're as part of the, how much they lost. We look at the college football has kind of emerged as the big 3 between Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. And of the big 3, all 3 lost great quarterbacks last year. I asked Bill this question last week. I'll ask you this week. Of the big 3 that are replacing the quarterbacks, which school will be leaning most on their new QB1 next year to carry the offense?
I think by the nature of the offense and the system, it's probably Ohio State, just because you have those receivers that they have. You need to throw the ball to take advantage of it. And obviously they have TreVeyon Henderson and Mayan Williams and a good offensive line, so there's not a ton of pressure there. But I just think in Ryan Day's system, those quarterbacks have to be outstanding. Georgia, I think, is the least problematic of the options. It's probably going to be Carson Beck, and Carson Beck's probably going to be good, but the infrastructure is there around them. Alabama will be really interesting. This is not the Alabama wide receiver room of past years. This is not really the Alabama running room of past years either, even though I like Jason McCollum quite a bit. So that quarterback is going to have some pressure on them. But I just think by the nature of the position and the nature of who you're throwing to, it's probably Ohio State, just because the quarterback has a ton of pressure on them to get the ball to guys like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. Yeah, sorry, this is not making for good podcast material.
No, if you
play for the record, back, that was Bill's answer too.
You could just play back my answer from last week because you said everything I said. So Bill, if you and I
didn't want to admit it, but I studied ahead of time listening to podcasts. Just want to say your answer, just make it sound better.
You agree with me, it's always a good thing. So you also obviously transfer portal expert, 24/7 sports. What do you see is there a market for that in May in terms of, is there some quarterback battles you're watching where maybe the loser? I know Bill and I talked a little bit about Ole Miss last year this year where they kind of piled 3 guys in. Are there any battles you're watching, both maybe a guy leaves or maybe a team that's maybe looking to pick one up?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. Like Auburn still really needs a quarterback, for example. And that, I think that's kind of the big target there in terms of portal needs at quarterback. I can think of a few others that could use upgrades, but Auburn's the main one that comes to mind. In terms of quarterbacks that could leave, I should note that the SEC has a rule that on February 1st, I believe, that's the cutoff date for interconference transfers. So, I think a Georgia quarterback battle is really interesting. Let's say, for example, Brock Vandagriff doesn't win that job and he doesn't want to wait on Carson Beck. He could probably go somewhere and start, but by the SEC rulebook, he can't transfer to Auburn, for example. But in terms of quarterback battles, I think matter. Ohio State, Devin Brown versus Colin McCord, one of those guys probably doesn't want to sit. There's no guarantee 1 transfers, but that's going to be a big one to watch. The Georgia quarterback battle comes to mind. The Ole Miss quarterback battle, certainly. Although, you would have to get creative with the rules. Jackson Dart can't transfer. I don't believe he's graduated a second time without sitting a year. Spencer Sanders can't transfer again. Walker Howard can't transfer again and probably doesn't have an avenue to do so. Maybe things get crazy. Maybe like a Garrett Nussmeier goes in the portal, but I think LSU feels really good about keeping him around over the long term. So I would mostly focus on those schools that have high profile competitions with proven veterans that could enter the portal. But right now, there's just not a ton of them. Maybe like a Casey Thompson shakes loose at Nebraska if Jeff Sims looks like he's going to win that job. But there's like maybe.
But that would be his second transfer too, or would he be a grad transfer?
He would be a grad transfer. So the NCAA is usually pretty lenient on grad transfer waivers, even if you've used the transfer portal before. Maybe Texas Tech, like let's say Brendan Morton wins that job and Tyler Shuck doesn't want to stick around for another year. And I'm sure other situations will pop up, but those are the ones that come to mind, at least at first.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about UCLA too. They got Garbers, they got Dante Moore.
Yep. And Colin Shilley coming in from Kent State. Yeah.
Right. So one of them will be third string, although coaches get creative into saying that the competition is going to continue into the fall.
Oh, absolutely. I remember Lincoln Riley telling me that Kyler Murray was in a competition with Austin Kendall all the way up until week 1 of the season. You know, that classic competition with Kyler Murray and Austin Kendall. Yeah, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Chris. I was just going to tell you the big news in Columbus this morning is that Devin Brown will be wearing number 33.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay. That's
is there a significance to that? I don't understand.
I don't know. The only update I've seen on Twitter was Ryan Day said it reminded him of Larry Bird. So another quarterback wearing a non-conventional number in the spring. That's the big update here in Columbus.
Does that mean Devin Brown's transferring to Indiana State here soon? Should we be aware of that?
I don't know, probably, but no, I mean, you know, and I know you've given us a lot of time today. I know you got to be on your way, but I do have one question for you before we let you go is how will you celebrate Aaron Rodgers either A, leaving Green Bay or B, retiring? As somebody who has been at some of these games with me or been at some national title games and watched my erratic behavior during Packers games.
You know, as a Cowboys fan, I will celebrate it greatly because he's hurt me many times. And if he wants to go to the AFC or retire, that's totally fine. Like, I appreciate the fact being cleared for Dak Prescott to choke again in the later round of the playoffs. So it'll be great. But Bill, it's been a really good run with Aaron Rodgers. I'm sure you'll be feeling love soon. So I don't think I'll have to worry about your fandom ebbing at all in the press box.
Yeah, you've seen me behave, like I said, very poorly at times during maybe a Green Bay postseason game. This
is not. I'm sorry. Like, this is probably taking over a college football podcast. But does Aaron Rodgers still have it? Like, are you still a believer? Do you think he could still be like an MVP level player?
I am of the opinion that if he moves on, it's fine. I've wanted to see Jordan Love play the last 3 years. And since it is a college football podcast, I've been curious about Jordan Love since his days at Utah State. Like, I want to see it on the field. And if that's this year, and if Aaron goes to the Jets and does what Brett Favre did with the Jets, it's like I have a playbook to mentally and emotionally prepare for this. And Bill's a Patriots fan, so I already joked with him this morning. I was like, what are you going to do when Rodgers goes into Foxborough and knocks you guys out of the playoffs? So I just don't know why somebody would go to the AFC, personally. Like, AFC is pretty loaded, and you're dealing with a lot of very good teams, a lot of good quarterbacks. But that's a topic for another day. So, but no, like I told Bill, Chris, I knew you would be great with us, sharing insight with the Longhorns. I miss you on the road. I haven't seen you in a while. So definitely we'll be following your reporting on Arch and all things Texas.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right.
I wish you the best of luck during this saga, and I'm sure it'll go well.
All right. Thank you, Chris. That was great. And you can follow him at 24/7 Sports, National College Football Writer, and we will check in with you down the road. Thanks, Chris. And good stuff again from one of our guests, eh?
No, we've got a solid run here. So we've covered Nebraska, Georgia, Texas. I'm sure we'll have some more as spring football goes on. I know, like I said, there's some buzz in Columbus with them starting this week, here in Big Ten country, and some other schools that we look at. Chris is a solid guy. He's a really nice person. And I'm glad that we've been able to bring on some really just nice people in the business. It pays off to be nice to other people.
Yeah, it's been great. Yeah, and we thank all of our All America podcast listeners. Remind you, we have a CFB Nation channel on YouTube where you can see all these guests and see Bill and I, but mostly we want you to see the guests and not Bill and I. But yeah, no, it's been good to check in around the country. We'll try to continue to do that as we go through the off season. Now, this is normally a college football podcast, but Selection Sunday is looming. We're going to do a little hoops talk for a few minutes. Bill Bender is the bracketologist for sportingnews.com. And Bill, I did some research. I don't know if I told you that. But first, before we get into the bracketology, Trocchi trivia, I got to ask you the Trocchi trivia question. We will have the answer at the end of the show. It is similar to a question we already discussed a few weeks ago. If Kansas repeats as national champion, they will join Georgia as a repeat national champion. When's the last time college football and college basketball had repeat national champions in the same year? Think about that, and we'll get back to that answer at the end of the show. So Bill, you're the bracketologist. You've done 7 versions of your bracket over the last month. You're diving in. It's great. The folks over at bracketmatrix.com, have you checked them out?
I saw that. I follow along.
They do.
So yeah, go tell them what I ranked last year. I'm kind of
200. There's 212 kind of official media brackets out there that they tracked. You were 114th, almost right at the 50 percentile. Andy Katz, 110th, right near you. Jerry Palm, 125th, right behind you. So good company there, Bill. Good company. We will definitely follow along. Your final bracket will come out Sunday morning with your final projection, the one that the Bracket Matrix will grade everybody on, and we'll see. But that's an impressive number. I'm telling you. It's pretty good.
Well, I like doing it, and obviously we have Mike DeCourcy at Sporting News too, and I always tell people he's best college basketball writer in the country. So when you're kind of playing backup quarterback to him, we talked this morning. I mean, one of the first things I was talking to him about was, I like Xavier as a 3 seed. UConn's on most brackets 3 seeds, and part of my methodology is have the spreadsheet, the numbers, the Ken Palm, the net, the quad 1 stuff. But I peek around at what Jerry does and Joe does. I mean, they're obviously forerunners in the industry. So, but there's always room for disagreements. Like one we were talking through yesterday is one of the leading questions this week is North Carolina going to get in? And I said, yeah, they have one quad 1 win. But I was telling you, they also wear North Carolina uniforms. So if they win 2 in the ACC tournament, I could totally see them getting a first 4 in and over a Utah State or a Nevada or, one of these the Big Ten cluster of teams is something like I've never seen before.
That would be something to see North Carolina playing in a first 4 game in Dayton. Let me tell you, those uniforms that you talk about, they don't seem to fit that scenario right there. But we've got, if you talk about the number 1 seeds a little bit, looks like we have 5 candidates essentially in Houston, Alabama, Kansas, Purdue, and UCLA. And I won't necessarily ask who you feel like will be the final 4 number 1s. It doesn't really matter because the 5th one will be a number 2 and they'll play one of the number 1s. But the top 5 seem to have separated themselves a little bit. Who do you feel best about in that group of 5 that they could actually, win the whole thing?
Probably Kansas. I mean, and I get how hard it is to repeat, and it hasn't happened since Florida in college basketball, but they have all the pieces when I watch them. The drawback with them is, and I was talking through this with one of my friends, I was like, they've been blown out a couple times, like championship teams, and maybe it's changed, but like when you see a team, like they got blown out Saturday at Texas, and there wasn't much fight in the second half. So, I mean, they could just as easily bounce back and win the Big 12 tournament. I like Houston and UCLA for their defense, and that style could win over in a tournament game. And, Alabama, we'll see. There's obviously a lot going on with Brandon Miller on and off the court there. So you wonder how. I just wonder with them, without getting. Everybody knows the story now. I wonder how much that weighs on a team.
I think it definitely has. They have not
Yeah.
played great since that's all come out. They have
And
not.
when and as you know, Bill, when you get in a neutral site, everybody's going to be cheering against Alabama when they play.
No
Especially, you're already like that when you're a 1 seed. Like, if Kansas is somewhere, everybody else is going to be cheering against
Although
Kansas.
the first they might get sent to Birmingham, so
Well, that might help.
The
That
first
would
2
help.
rounds, that's going to help. Yeah.
Right. And then Purdue, being Big Ten country, we wear this around our neck that the Big Ten hasn't won a championship since 2000. Purdue hasn't been to the Final Four since 1980. So everybody knows the snake-bitten nature of this Big Ten is one. I like Purdue. I like Indiana. The rest, I don't know if I like them getting out of the first weekend. Other than maybe like Iowa. The rest of them have been just so frenetic and inconsistent all season. It's going to be very interesting to see how the Big Ten performs.
One interesting note, too, about the potential number ones, Houston, the Final Four is in Houston.
Yeah.
So that could be a good factor for them, of course. You write a bracket buster type of column for us every Selection Sunday as well. That'll be available to read Monday morning on sportingnews.com. Championship week's going on right now. Some of the mid-major conferences. Who have you keeping an eye on? I won't, hold you to a pick yet, since there's a lot of basketball still to be played. But who are you keeping an eye on this week potentially for that bracket busters column that you'll write on Sunday?
Well, probably Drake as one. And I'm going to be honest with you, Bill. I like this week more than next week. And I might be in the minority there. I like staying up and watching, like last night I watched Charleston play, and I watched Chattanooga and Furman play. I like watching them so you have some sort of feel for how you obviously you don't know how it might go in the tournament, but I really like Drake. I watched their last 2 games. They won 13 of their last 14. I like the offense that they run, and Missouri Valley Conference teams typically play up in the tournament. Now, our colleague Matt Letofsky is a North Dakota State grad, so he will not like this next part because they're playing Oral Roberts tonight. And Oral Roberts is one that, if you remember them last year, or 2 years ago, they destroyed your bracket. But Max Asmus is back. You're going to be like, oh, I remember that guy. He destroyed my bracket 2 years ago and beat Ohio State and did this and almost beat Arkansas. They've got all those guys back. They haven't lost a Summit League game. And I think they're going to win tonight, and I think that pushes them to 30 wins. And anytime a team has 30 wins, they're going to be confident whoever they play. Sometimes the committee screws them over and puts them against somebody they shouldn't. But those are 2 in particular that stand out. And as you know, I'm a MAC grad, and Toledo, Kent State, as much as it's going to hurt to probably watch one of them beat my alma mater, I think they're 2 teams that are really battle tested in the MAC.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, let's revisit. You ready? Trocchi trivia?
I am kind of.
You ready? So if Kansas ends up cutting the nets down again, they will repeat as national champions, and they will join Georgia, who has just repeated as national champions. When is the last time we've seen a college football and a college basketball team repeat in the same school year?
Like the same team, or the same, like you talk like Georgia won back to back and Kansas won back to back. So I think you have to go all the way back to the 70s, because it would probably be a UCLA Oklahoma combo.
Very close, my friend. Very close.
Is it UCLA Alabama?
It's 1970, 1971. It was Nebraska.
I got the wrong Big 12 school.
So Big 12. So Nebraska and UCLA. 1970, Nebraska shared it with Texas and Ohio State. And then in 1971, of course, with Johnny Rodgers, they won it outright. And UCLA was in the midst of their 6 in a row or 7 in a row in 1970 and 1971. So that
was the easy part of the answer.
Yeah.
Just say UCLA because they won the entire decade. And I think, since, isn't it just like Duke in 91, 92 and Florida? It's really hard to go back to back in the tournament. It really is. And those Florida teams, wow. And
the amazing thing was Florida almost repeated in football and basketball at the same time.
Right. They had a chance to do both. And what a great 2-year run for that school it was.
So that was pretty amazing too. So, all right. Well, that'll do it for today's show. We'll be back next week after Selection Sunday. We will obviously focus on college football, but we will mix in a little hoops talk for those of you who are following the March Madness, which most college football fans do, at least throughout the month of March. And then, we will see who we may bring on next week, or we may have topics to discuss just ourselves. But we thank everybody again for subscribing to the All America podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And like I said, we have a YouTube channel, CFB Nation, where you can subscribe. We appreciate that. We appreciate comments that are left. We've had big numbers on our in terms of views on the CFB Nation YouTube channel. So that's been all good, but we enjoy it. It's 12 months, Bill. It's 12 months a year.
Absolutely. Thanks so much to all our listeners, and we look forward to it next week.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the All America podcast.